Chapter 19 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. How the Sheriff held another shooting match. To tell the truth, I'm well informed, yon match it is a wile. The Sheriff, I know, devises this, us archers to beguile. Now the Sheriff was so greatly troubled in heart over the growing power of Robin Hood that he did a very foolish thing. He went to London town to lay his troubles before the King and get another force of troops to cope with the outlaws. King Richard was not yet returned from the Holy Land, but Prince John heard him with scorn. "Pooh!" said he, shrugging his shoulders. "What have I to do with all this? Art thou not sheriff for me? The law is in force to take thy course of them that injure thee. Go, get thee gone, and by thyself devise some tricking game to trap these rebels, and never let me see thy face at court again until thou hast a better tale to tell." So away went the Sheriff in sorrier pass than ever, and cudgelled his brain on the way home for some plan of action. His daughter met him on his return and saw at once that he had been on a poor mission. She was minded to upbraid him when she learned what he had told the Prince, but the words of the latter started her to thinking afresh. I have it," she exclaimed at length. "Why should we not hold another shooting match? 'Tis fair year, as you know, and another tourney will be expected. Now we will proclaim a general amnesty, as did King Harry himself, and say that the field is open and unmolested to all comers. Belike Robin Hood's men will be tempted to twang the bow, and then—" "And then," said the Sheriff, jumping up with alacrity, "we shall see on which side of the gate they stop overnight." So the Sheriff lost no time in proclaiming a tourney, to be held that same fall at the fair. It was open to all comers, said the proclamation, and none should be molested in their going and coming. Furthermore, an arrow with a golden head and shaft of silver white should be given to the winner, who would be heralded abroad as the finest archer in all the north country. Also, many rich prizes were to be given to other clever archers. These tidings came in due course to Robin Hood, under the greenwood tree, and fired his impetuous spirit. "Come prepare ye, my merry men all," quoth he, "and we'll go to the fair and take some part in this sport." With that stepped forth the merry cobbler, David of Doncaster. "Master," quoth he, "be ruled by me and stir not from the greenwood. To tell the truth, I'm well informed yon match is naught but a trap. I know the Sheriff has devised it to beguile us archers into some treachery." "That word savors of the coward," replied Robin, "and pleases me not. Let come what will, I'll try my skill at that same archery." Then up spoke Little John and said, "Come, listen to me how it shall be that we will not be discovered. Our mantles all of Lincoln green behind us we will leave. We'll dress us all so several, they shall not us perceive. One shall wear white, another red, one yellow, another blue. Thus in disguise to the exercise we'll go whatever ensue." This advice met with general favor from the adventurous fellows, and they lost no time in putting it into practice. Maid Marian and Mistress Dale, assisted by Friar Tuck, prepared some vari-colored costumes, and 'gainst the fair day had fitted out the 70 men till you would never have taken them for other than villagers decked for the holiday. And forth went they from the greenwood, with hearts all firm and stout, resolved to meet the Sheriff's men and have a merry bout. Along the highway they fell in with many other bold fellows from the countryside, going with their ruddy-cheeked lasses toward the wide open gates of Nottingham. So in through the gates trooped the whole gay company, Robin's men behaving as awkwardly and laughing and talking as noisily as the rest, while the Sheriff's scowling men-at-arms stood round about and sought to find one who looked like a forester, but without avail. The herald now set forth the terms of the contest, as on former occasions, and the shooting presently began. Robin had chosen 5 of his men to shoot with him, and the rest were to mingle with the crowd and also watch the gates. These 5 were Little John, Will Scarlet, Will Stuteley, Much, and Allan a Dale. The other competitors made a brave showing on the first round, especially Gilbert of the White Hand, who was present and never shot better. The contest later narrowed down between Gilbert and Robin, but at the first lead when the butts were struck so truly by various well-known archers, the sheriff was in doubt whether to feel glad or sorry. He was glad to see such skill, but sorry that the outlaws were not in it. Some said if Robin Hood were here, and all his men to boot, sure none of them could pass these men, so bravely do they shoot. "Aye," quoth the sheriff, and scratched his head, "I thought he would be here. I thought he would, but though he's bold, he durst not now appear." This word was privately brought to Robin by David of Doncaster, and the saying vexed him sorely, but he bit his lip in silence. Ere long, he thought to himself, we shall see whether Robin Hood be here or not. Meantime the shooting had been going forward, and Robin's men had done so well that the air was filled with shouts. One cried Blue Jacket, another cried Brown, and a third cried Brave Yellow, but the fourth man said yon man in red in this place has no fellow. For that was Robin Hood himself, for he was clothed in red. At every shot the prize he got, for he was both sure and dead. Thus went the second round of the shooting, and thus the third and last, till even Gilbert of the White Hand was fairly beaten. During all this shooting Robin exchanged no word with his men, each treating the other as a perfect stranger. Natheless, such great shooting could not pass without revealing the archers. The sheriff thought he discovered, in the winner of the golden arrow, the person of Robin Hood without peradventure. So he sent word privately for his men-at-arms to close round the group, but Robin's men also got wind of the plan. To keep up appearances, the sheriff summoned the crowd to form in a circle, and after as much delay as possible the arrow was presented. The delay gave time enough for the soldiers to close in. As Robin received his prize, bowed awkwardly, and turned away, the sheriff, letting his zeal get the better of his discretion, grasped him about the neck and called upon his men to arrest the traitor. But the moment the sheriff touched Robin, he received such a buffet on the side of his head that he let go instantly and fell back several paces. Turning to see who had struck him, he recognized Little John. "Ah, rascal Greenleaf, I have you now!" he exclaimed, springing at him. Just then, however, he met a new check. "This is from another of your devoted servants," said a voice which he knew to be that of Much the miller's son, and thwack went his open palm upon the sheriff's cheek, sending that worthy rolling over and over upon the ground. By this time the conflict had become general, but the sheriff's men suffered the disadvantage of being hampered by the crowd of innocent onlookers, whom they could not tell from the outlaws and so dared not attack, while the other outlaws in the rear fell upon them and put them in confusion. For a moment a fierce rain of blows ensued, then the clear bugle note from Robin ordered a retreat. The two warders at the nearest gate tried to close it, but were shot dead in their tracks. David of Doncaster threw a third soldier into the moat, and out through the gate went the foresters in good order, keeping a respectful distance between themselves and the advancing soldiery, by means of their well-directed shafts. But the fight was not to go easily this day, for the soldiery, smarting from their recent discomfiture at the widow's cottage, and knowing that the eyes of the whole shire were upon them, fought well, and pressed closely after the retreating outlaws. More than one ugly wound was given and received. No less than 5 of the sheriff's men were killed outright, and a dozen others injured, while 4 of Robin's men were bleeding from severe flesh cuts. Then Little John, who had fought by the side of his chief, suddenly fell forward with a slight moan. An arrow had pierced his knee. Robin seized the big fellow with almost superhuman strength. Up he took him on his back, and bare him well a mile. Many a time he laid him down and shot another while. Meanwhile Little John grew weaker and closed his eyes. At last he sank to the ground and feebly motioned Robin to let him lie. "Master Robin," said he, "have I not served you well, ever since we met upon the bridge?" "Truer servant never man had," answered Robin. "Then if ever you loved me, and for the sake of that service, draw your bright brown sword and strike off my head. Never let me fall alive into the hand of the Sheriff of Nottingham." "Not for all the gold in England would I do either of the things you suggest." "God forbid!" cried Arthur a Bland, hurrying to the rescue, and packing his wounded kinsman upon his broad shoulders, he soon brought him within the shelter of the forest. Once there, the Sheriff's men did not follow, and Robin caused litters of boughs to be made for Little John and the other 4 wounded men. Quickly were they carried through the wood until the hermitage of Friar Tuck was reached, where their wounds were dressed. Little John's hurt was pronounced to be the most serious of any, but he was assured that in 2 or 3 weeks' time he could get about again, whereat the active giant groaned mightily. That evening consternation came upon the hearts of the band. A careful roll call was taken to see if all the yeomen had escaped, when it was found that Will Stuteley was missing, and Maid Marian also was nowhere to be found. Robin was seized with dread. He knew that Marian had gone to the fair, but felt that she would hardly come to grief. Her absence, however, portended some danger, and he feared that it was connected with Will Stuteley. The sheriff would hang him speedily and without mercy if he were captured. The rest of the band shared their leader's uneasiness, though they said no word. They knew that if Will were captured, the battle must be fought over again the next day, and Will must be saved at any cost, but no man flinched from the prospect. That evening, while the sheriff and his wife and daughter sat at meat in the mansion house, the sheriff boasted of how he would make an example of the captured outlaw, for Stuteley had indeed fallen into his hands. "He shall be strung high," he said in a loud voice, "and none shall dare lift a finger. I now have Robin Hood's men on the run, and we shall soon see who is master in this shire. I am only sorry that we let them have the golden arrow." As he spoke, a missive sped through a window and fell clattering upon his plate, causing him to spring back in alarm. It was the golden arrow, and on its feathered shaft was sewed a little note which read: "This from one who will take no gifts from liars, and who henceforth will show no mercy. Look well to yourself. R. H." So ends Chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Robin Hood. How Will Stuteley was rescued. Forth of the greenwood are they gone, yea, all courageously, resolving to bring Stuteley home, or every man to die. The next day dawned bright and sunny. The whole face of nature seemed gay, as if in despite of the tragedy which was soon to take place in the walls of Nottingham town. The gates were not opened upon this day, for the sheriff was determined to carry through the hanging of Will Stuteley undisturbed. No man therefore was to be allowed entrance from without, all that morning and until after the fatal hour of noon, when Will's soul was to be launched into eternity. Early in the day Robin had drawn his men to a point, as near as he dared, in the wood where he could watch the road leading to the east gate. He himself was clad in a bright scarlet dress, while his men, a goodly array, wore their suits of sober Lincoln green. They were armed with broadswords, and each man carried his bow and a full quiver of new arrows, straightened and sharpened cunningly by Middle the Tinker. Over their greenwood dress each man had thrown a rough mantle, making him look not unlike a friar. "I hold it good, comrades," then said Robin Hood, "to tarry here in hiding for a season, while we sent some one forth to obtain tidings. For in sooth 'twill work no good to march upon the gates if they be closed." "Look, master," quoth one of the widow's sons, "there comes a palmer along the road from the town. Belike he can tell us how the land ties, and if Stuteley be really in jeopardy. Shall I go out and engage him in speech?" "Go," answered Robin. So stout Will went out from the band while the others hid themselves and waited. When he had come closer to the palmer, who seemed a slight youngish fellow, he doffed his hat full courteously and said: "I crave your pardon, holy man, but can you tell me tidings of Nottingham town? Do they intend to put an outlaw to death this day?" "Yea," answered the palmer sadly, "'tis true enough. Sorry be the day. I have passed the very spot where the gallows tree is going up. 'Tis out upon the roadway near the sheriff's castle. One Will Stuteley is to be hung thereon at noon, and I could not bear the sight, so came away." The palmer spoke in a muffled voice, and as his hood was pulled well over his head, stout Will could not discern what manner of man he was. Over his shoulder he carried a long staff, with the fashion of a little cross at one end, and he had sandaled feet like any monk. Stout Will noticed idly that the feet were very small and white, but gave no second thought to the matter. "Who will shrive the poor wretch if you have come away from him?" he asked reproachfully. The question seemed to put a new idea into the palmer's head. He turned so quickly that he almost dropped his hood. "Do you think I should undertake this holy office?" "By Saint Peter and the Blessed Virgin, I do indeed. Else who will do it? The bishop and all his whining clerks may be there, but not one would say a prayer for his soul." "But I am only a poor palmer," the other began hesitatingly. "Natheless, your prayers are as good as any and better than some," replied Will. "Right gladly will I go, then," said the palmer, "but I fear me I cannot get into the city. You may know that the gates are fast locked for this morning, to all who would come in, although they let any pass out who will." "Come with me," said stout Will, "and my master will see that you pass through the gates." So the palmer pulled his cloak still closer about him and was brought before Robin Hood, to whom he told all he knew of the situation. He ended with, "If I may make so bold, I would not try to enter the city from this gate, as 'tis closely guarded since yesterday, but on the far side no attack is looked for." "My thanks, gentle palmer," quoth Robin. "Your suggestion is good, and we will deploy to the gate upon the far side." So the men marched silently but quickly until they were near to the western gate. Then Arthur a Bland asked leave to go ahead as a scout, and quietly made his way to a point under the tower by the gate. The moat was dry on this side, as these were times of peace, and Arthur was further favored by a stout ivy vine which grew out from an upper window. Swinging himself up boldly by means of this friendly vine, he crept through the window and in a moment more had sprung upon the warder from behind and grabbed him hard about the throat. The warder had no chance to utter the slightest sound, and soon lay bound and gagged upon the floor, while Arthur a Bland slipped himself into his uniform and got hold of his keys. 'Twas the work of but a few moments more to open the gates, let down the bridge, and admit the rest of the band, and they got inside the town so quietly that none knew of their coming. Fortune also favored them in the fact that just at this moment the prison doors had been opened for the march of the condemned man, and every soldier and idle lout in the market-place had trooped thither to see him pass along. Presently out came Will Stuteley, with firm step but dejected air. He looked eagerly to the right hand and to the left, but saw none of the band, and though more than one curious face betrayed friendship in it, he knew there could be no aid from such source. Will's hands were tied behind his back. He marched between rows of soldiery, and the sheriff and the bishop brought up the rear on horses, looking mightily puffed up and important over the whole proceeding. He would show these sturdy rebels, would the sheriff, whose word was law. He knew that the gates were tightly fastened, and further he believed that the outlaws would hardly venture again within the walls, even if the gates were open. And as he looked around at the 50 archers and pikemen who lined the way to the gallows, he smiled with grim satisfaction. Seeing that no help was nigh, the prisoner paused at the foot of the scaffold and spoke in a firm tone to the sheriff. "My lord sheriff," quoth he, "since I must needs die, grant me one boon, for my noble master ne'er yet had a man that was hanged on a tree. Give me a sword all in my hand, and let me be unbound, and with thee and thy men will I fight, till I lie dead on the ground." But the sheriff would by no means listen to his request, but swore that he should be hanged a shameful death, and not die by the sword valiantly. "Oh, no, no, no," the sheriff said, "thou shalt on the gallows die. Aye, and so shall thy master too, if ever it in me lie." "O dastard coward," Stuteley cried, "faint-hearted peasant slave, if ever my master do thee meet, thou shalt thy payment have. My noble master thee doth scorn, and all thy cowardly crew, such silly imps unable are, bold Robin to subdue." This brave speech was not calculated to soothe the sheriff. "To the gallows with him!" he roared, giving a sign to the hangman, and Stuteley was pushed into the rude cart which was to bear him under the gallows until his neck was leashed. Then the cart would be drawn roughly away, and the unhappy man would swing out over the tail of it into another world. But at this moment came a slight interruption. A boyish-looking palmer stepped forth and said, "Your Excellency, let me at least shrive this poor wretch's soul ere it be hurled into eternity." "No," shouted the sheriff, "let him die a dog's death." "Then this damnation will rest upon you," said the monk firmly. "You, my lord bishop, cannot stand by and see this wrong done." The bishop hesitated. Like the sheriff, he wanted no delay, but the people were beginning to mutter among themselves and move about uneasily. He said a few words to the sheriff, and the latter nodded to the monk ungraciously. "Perform your duty, sir priest," quoth he, "and be quick about it." Then turning to his soldiers, "Watch this palmer narrowly," he commanded. "Belike he is in league with those rascally outlaws." But the palmer paid no heed to his last words. He began to tell his beads quickly, and to speak in a low voice to the condemned man, but he did not touch his bonds. Then came another stir in the crowd, and one came pushing through the press of people and soldiery to come near to the scaffold. "I pray you, Will, before you die, take leave of all your friends," cried out the well-known voice of Much, the miller's son. At the word, the palmer stepped back suddenly and looked to one side. The sheriff also knew the speaker. "Seize him!" he shouted. "'Tis another of the crew. He is the villain cook who once did rob me of my silver plate. We'll make a double hanging of this." "Not so fast, good master sheriff," retorted Much. "First catch your man and then hang him. But meanwhile I would like to borrow my friend of you a while." And with one stroke of his keen hunting knife he cut the bonds which fastened the prisoner's arms, and Stuteley leaped lightly from the cart. "Treason!" screamed the sheriff, getting black with rage. "Catch the varlets!" So saying, he spurred his horse fiercely forward, and rising in his stirrups brought down his sword with might and main at Much's head. But his former cook dodged nimbly underneath the horse and came up on the other side, while the weapon whistled harmlessly in the air. "Nay, Sir Sheriff," he cried, "I must e'en borrow your sword for the friend I have borrowed." Thereupon he snatched the weapon deftly from the sheriff's hand. "Here, Stuteley," said he, "the sheriff has lent you his own sword. Back to back with me, man, and we'll teach these knaves a trick or two." Meanwhile the soldiers had recovered from their momentary surprise and had flung themselves into the fray. A clear bugle note had also sounded the same, which the soldiers had learned to dread. 'Twas the rallying note of the greenwood men. Cloth-yard shafts began to hurtle through the air, and Robin and his men cast aside their cloaks and sprang forward, crying, "Locksley! Locksley! A rescue! A rescue!" On the instant a terrible scene of hand-to-hand fighting followed. The sheriff's men, though once more taken by surprise, were determined to sell this rescue dearly. They packed in closely and stubbornly about the condemned man and Much and the palmer, and it was only by desperate rushes that the foresters made an opening in the square. Ugly cuts and bruises were exchanged freely, and lucky was the man who escaped with only these. Many of the onlookers, who had long hated the sheriff and felt sympathy for Robin's men, also plunged into the conflict, although they could not well keep out of it in sooth, and aided the rescuers no little. At last, with a mighty onrush, Robin cleaved a way through the press to the scaffold itself, and not a second too soon, for two men with pikes had leaped upon the cart and were in the act of thrusting down upon the palmer and Will Stuteley. A mighty upward blow from Robin's good blade sent the pike flying from the hand of one, while a well-directed arrow from the outskirt pierced the other fellow's throat. "God save you, master," cried Will Stuteley joyfully. "I had begun to fear that I would never see your face again." "A rescue!" shouted the outlaws afresh, and the soldiery became faint-hearted and began to give back. But the field was not yet won, for they retreated in close order toward the east gate, resolved to hem the attackers within the city walls. Here again, however, they were in error, since the outlaws did not go out by their nearest gate. They made a sally in that direction in order to mislead the soldiery, then abruptly turned and headed for the west gate, which was still guarded by Arthur a Bland. The sheriff's men raised an exultant shout at this, thinking that they had the enemy trapped. Down they charged after them, but the outlaws made good their lead, and soon got through the gate and over the bridge which had been let down by Arthur a Bland. Close upon their heels came the soldiers, so close that Arthur had no time to close the gate again or raise the bridge. So he threw away his key and fell in with the yeomen, who now began their retreat up the long hill to the woods. On this side the town, the road leading to the forest was long and almost unprotected. The greenwood men were therefore in some distress, for the archers shot at them from loopholes in the walls, and the pikemen were reinforced by a company of mounted men from the castle. But the outlaws retreated stubbornly, and now and again turned to hold their pursuers at bay by a volley of arrows. Stuteley was in their midst, fighting with the energy of two, and the little palmer was there also, but took no part save to keep close to Robin's side and mutter silent words as though in prayer. Robin put his horn to his lips to sound a rally, when a flying arrow from the enemy pierced his hand. The palmer gave a little cry and sprang forward. The sheriff, who followed close with the men on horseback, also saw the wound and gave a great huzza. "Ha! You will shoot no more bows for a season, master outlaw," he shouted. "You lie," retorted Robin fiercely, wrenching the shaft from his hand to spite the streaming blood. "I have saved one shot for you all this day. Here, take it." And he fitted the same arrow which had wounded him upon the string of his bow and let it fly toward the sheriff's head. The sheriff fell forward upon his horse in mortal terror, but not so quickly as to escape unhurt. The sharp point laid a bare, deep gash upon his scalp, and must certainly have killed him if it had come closer. The fall of the sheriff discomfited his followers for the moment, and Robin's men took this chance to speed on up the hill. The palmer had whipped out a small white handkerchief and tried to staunch Robin's wound as they went. At sight of the palmer's hand, Robin turned with a start and pushed back the other's hood. "Marian!" he exclaimed. "You here!" It was indeed Maid Marian, who had helped save Will, and been in the stress of battle from the first. Now she hung her head as though caught in wrong. "I had to come, Robin," she said simply, "and I knew you would not let me come else." Their further talk was interrupted by an exclamation from Will Scarlet. "By the saints, we are trapped!" he said, and pointed to the top of the hill toward which they were pressing. There from out a gray castle poured a troop of men armed with pikes and axes, who shouted and came running down upon them. At the same instant the sheriff's men also renewed the pursuit. "Alas!" cried poor Marian, "we are undone. There is no way of escape." "Courage, dear heart," said Robin, drawing her close to him, but his own spirit sank as he looked about for some outlet. Then, oh joyful sight, he recognized among the foremost of those coming from the castle the once doleful knight, Sir Richard of the Lea. He was smiling now and greatly excited. "A hood! A hood!" he cried. "A rescue! A rescue!" Never were there more welcome sights and sounds than these. With a great cheer the outlaws raced up the hill to meet their new friends, and soon the whole force had gained the shelter of the castle. Bang went the bridge as it swung back, with great clanking of chains. Clash went one great door upon the other as they shut in the outlaw band and shut out the sheriff, who dashed up at the head of his men, his bandaged face streaked with blood and inflamed with rage. So ends Chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Robin Hood, How Sir Richard of the Lea Repaid His Debt. The proud sheriff loud gan cry, and said, "Thou traitor knight, thou keepest here the king's enemy against the laws and right." "Open the gate!" shouted the sheriff hoarsely to the sentinel upon the walls. "Open, I say, in the king's name." "Why, who are you to come thus brawling upon my premises?" asked a haughty voice, and Sir Richard himself stepped forth upon the turret. "You know me well, traitor knight," said the sheriff. "Now give up into my hands the enemy of the king, whom you have sheltered against the laws and right." "Fair and softly, sir," quoth the knight smoothly. "I well avow that I have done certain deeds this day, but I have done them upon my own land, which you now trespass upon, and I shall answer only to the king, whom God preserve, for my actions." "Thou soft-spoken villain," said the sheriff, still in a towering passion. "I also serve the king, and if these outlaws are not given up to me at once, I shall lay siege to the castle and burn it with fire." "First show me your warrants," said Sir Richard curtly. "My word is enough. Am I not Sheriff of Nottingham?" "If you are, in sooth," retorted the knight, "you should know that you have no authority within my lands unless you bear the king's order. In the meantime, go mend your manners, lording." And Sir Richard snapped his fingers and disappeared from the walls. The sheriff, after lingering a few moments longer in hope of further parley, was forced to withdraw, swearing fiercely. "The king's order," muttered he. "That shall I have without delay, as well as this upstart knight's estates, for King Richard is lately returned, I hear, from the Holy Land." Meanwhile the knight had gone back to Robin Hood, and the two men greeted each other right gladly. "Well met, bold Robin," cried he, taking him in his arms. "Well met, indeed. The Lord has lately prospered me, and I was minded this day to ride forth and repay my debt to you." "And so you have," answered Robin gaily. "Nay, 'twas nothing, this small service," said the knight. "I meant the moneys coming to you." "They have all been repaid," said Robin. "My Lord of Hereford himself gave them to me." "The exact sum?" asked the knight. "The exact sum," answered Robin, winking solemnly. Sir Richard smiled, but said no more at the time. Robin was made to rest until dinner should be served. Meanwhile a leech bound up his hand with ointment, promising him that he should soon have its use again. Some half score others of the yeomen had been hurt in the fight, but luckily none of grave moment. They were all bandaged and made happy by bumpers of ale. At dinner Sir Richard presented Robin to his wife and son. The lady was stately and gracious, and made much of Marian, whom she had known as a little girl, and who was now clothed more seemly for a dinner than in monkish garments. The young esquire was a goodly youth, and bade fair to make as stout a knight as his father. The feast was a joyous event. There were 2 long tables, and 200 men sat down at them, and ate and drank and afterward sang songs. 140 of these men wore Lincoln green and called Robin Hood their chief. Never, I ween, had there been a more gallant company at table in Leigh Castle. That night the foresters tarried within the friendly walls, and the next day took leave, though Sir Richard protested that they should have made a longer stay. And he took Robin aside to his strong room and pressed him again to take the 400 golden pounds, but his guest was firm. "Keep the money, for it is your own," said Robin. "I have but made the bishop return that which he extorted unjustly." Sir Richard thanked him in a few earnest words, and asked him and all his men to visit the armory before they departed, and therein they saw, placed apart, 140 stout yew bows of cunning make, with fine waxen silk strings, and 140 sheaves of arrows. Every shaft was a just ell long, set with peacock feathers and notched with silver, and Sir Richard's fair lady came forward and with her own hands gave each yeoman a bow and a sheath. "In sooth, these are poor presents we have made you, good Robin Hood," said Sir Richard, "but they carry with them 1,000 times their weight in gratitude." The Sheriff made good his threat to inform the King. Forth rode he to London town upon the week following, his scalp wound having healed sufficiently to permit him to travel. This time he did not seek out Prince John, but asked audience with King Richard of the Lionheart himself. His Majesty had but lately returned from the Crusades, and was just then looking into the state of his kingdom, so the Sheriff found ready audience. Then to him the Sheriff spoke at length concerning Robin Hood, how that for many months the outlaws had defied the King and slayed the King's deer, how Robin had gathered about him the best archers in all the countryside, and finally how the traitorous knight Sir Richard of the Leigh had rescued the band when capture seemed certain, and refused to deliver them up to justice. The King heard him through with attention, and quoth he: "Meseems I have heard of this same Robin Hood, and his men, and also seen somewhat of their prowess. Did not these same outlaws shoot in a royal tourney at Finsbury Field?" "They did, your Majesty, under a royal amnesty." In this speech the Sheriff erred, for the King asked quickly: "How came they last to the fair at Nottingham? By stealth?" "Yes, your Majesty." "Did you forbid them to come?" "No, your Majesty, that is—" "Speak out." "For the good of the shire," began the Sheriff again, falteringly, "we did proclaim an amnesty, but 'twas because these men had proved a menace." "Now by my halidome," quoth the King, while his brow grew black, "such treachery would be unknown in the camp of the Saracen, and yet we call ourselves a Christian people." The Sheriff kept silence through very fear and shame, then the King began speech again. "Natheless, my Lord Sheriff, we promise to look into this matter. Those outlaws must be taught that there is but one king in England, and that he stands for the law." So the Sheriff was dismissed, with very mixed feelings, and went his way home to Nottingham town. A fortnight later the King began to make good his word, by riding with a small party of knights to Leigh Castle. Sir Richard was advised of the cavalcade's approach, and quickly recognized his royal master in the tall knight who rode in advance. Hasting to open wide his castle gates, he went forth to meet the King, and fell on one knee and kissed his stirrup. For Sir Richard, also, had been with the King to the Holy Land, and they had gone on many adventurous quests together. The King bade him rise, and dismounted from his own horse to greet him as a brother in arms. And arm in arm they went into the castle, while bugles and trumpets sounded forth joyous welcome in honor of the great occasion. After the King had rested and supped, he turned upon the knight and with grave face inquired, "What is this I hear about your castle's becoming a nest and harbor for outlaws?" The Sir Richard of the Lea, divining that the Sheriff had been at the King's ear with his story, made a clean breast of all he knew, how that the outlaws had befriended him in sore need, as they had befriended others, and how that he had given them only knightly protection in return. The King liked the story well, for his own soul was one of chivalry, and he asked other questions about Robin Hood, and heard of the ancient wrong done his father before him, and of Robin's own enemies, and of his manner of living. "In sooth," cried King Richard, springing up, "I must see this bold fellow for myself. And you will entertain my little company and be ready to sally forth upon the second day, in quest of me if need were. I shall e'en fare alone into the greenwood to seek an adventure with him. But of this adventure you shall be told in the next tale, for I have already shown you how Sir Richard of the Lea repaid his debt with interest." So ends Chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Robin Hood. How King Richard came to Sherwood Forest. King Richard, hearing of the pranks of Robin Hood and his men, he much admired and more desired to see both him and them. Then Robin takes a can of ale, come let us now begin, and every man shall have his can, here's a health unto the King. Friar Tuck had nursed Little John's wounded knee so skilfully that it was now healed. In sooth, the last part of the nursing depended more upon strength than skill, for it consisted chiefly of holding down the patient, by main force, to his cot. Little John had felt so well that he had insisted upon getting up before the wound was healed, and he would have done so if the friar had not piled some holy books upon his legs and sat upon his stomach. Under this vigorous treatment, Little John was constrained to lie quiet until the friar gave him leave to get up. At last he had this leave, and he and the friar went forth to join the rest of the band, who were right glad to see them, you may be sure. They sat around a big fire, for 'twas a chilly evening, and they feasted and made merry in great content. A cold rain set in later, but the friar wended his way back, natheless, to his little hermitage. There he made himself a cheerful blaze, and changed his dripping robe, and had sat himself down, with a sigh of satisfaction, before a tankard of hot mulled wine and a pasty, when suddenly a voice was heard on the outside demanding admission. His kennel of dogs set up furious uproar on the instant, by way of proving the fact of a stranger's presence. "Now, by St. Peter," growled the friar, "who comes here at this unseemly hour? Does he take this for a hostelry? Move on, friend, else my mulled wine will get cold." So saying, he put the tankard to his lips, when a thundering rap sounded upon the door panel, making it to quiver, and causing Tuck almost to drop his tankard, while an angry voice shouted, "Ho, within there! Open, I say!" "Go your way in peace," roared back the friar. "I can do nothing for you. 'Tis but a few miles to Gamewell if you know the road." "But I do not know the road, and if I did I would not budge another foot. 'Tis wet without and dry within, so open, without further parley." "A murrain seize you for disturbing a holy man in his prayers," muttered Tuck savagely. Natheless, he was fain to unbar the door in order to keep it from being battered down. Then, lighting a torch at his fire and whistling for one of his dogs, he strode forth to see who his visitor might be. The figure of a tall knight, clad in a black coat of mail, with plumed helmet, stood before him. By his side stood his horse, also caparisoned in rich armor. "Have you no supper, brother?" asked the Black Knight curtly. "I must beg of you a bed and a bit of roof, for this night, and fain would refresh my body ere I sleep." "I have no room that even your steed would deign to accept, Sir Knight, and naught save a crust of bread and pitcher of water." "I' faith, I can smell better fare than that, brother, and must e'en force my company upon you, though I shall recompense it for gold in the name of the church. As for my horse, let him but be blanketed and put on the sheltered side of the house." And without further parley, the knight boldly strode past Tuck and his dog and entered the hermitage. Something about his masterful air pleased Tuck, in spite of his churlishness. "Sit you down, Sir Knight," quoth he, "and I will fasten up your steed, and find him somewhat in the shape of grain. Half also of my bed and board is yours this night, but we shall see later who is the better man, and is to give the orders." "With all my soul," said the knight, laughing. "I can pay my keeping in blows or gold as you prefer." The friar presently returned and drew up a small table near the fire. "Now, Sir Knight," quoth he, "put off your sword and helm, and such other war gear as it pleases you, and help me lay this table, for I am passing hungry." The knight did as he was told, and put aside the visor which had hid his face. He was a bronzed and bearded man with blue eyes, and hair shot with gold, haughty but handsome withal. Then once again the priest sat him down to his pasty and mulled wine, right hopefully. He spoke his grace with some haste, and was surprised to hear his guest respond fittingly in the Latin tongue. Then they attacked the wine and pasty valiantly, and the Black Knight made good his word of being in need of refreshment. Tuck looked ruefully at the rapidly disappearing food, but came to grudge it not, by reason of the stories with which his guest enlivened the meal. The wine and warmth of the room had cheered them both, and they were soon laughing uproariously as the best of comrades in the world. The Black Knight, it seemed, had travelled everywhere. He had been on crusades, had fought the courteous Saladin, had been in prison and often in peril. But now he spoke of it lightly and laughed it off, and made himself so friendly that Friar Tuck was like to choke with merriment. So passed the time till late, and the two fell asleep together, one on each side of the table which had been cleared to the platters. In the morning Friar Tuck awoke disposed to be surly, but was speedily mollified by the sight of the Black Knight, who had already risen gay as a lark, washed his face and hands, and was now stirring a hot gruel over the fire. "By my faith, I make a sorry host," cried Tuck, springing to his feet. And later, as they sat at breakfast, he added, "I want not your gold of which you spoke last night, but instead I will do what I can to speed you on your way whenever you wish to depart." "Then tell me," said the knight, "how I may find Robin Hood the outlaw, for I have a message to him from the King. All day yesterday I sought him, but found him not." Friar Tuck lifted up his hands in holy horror. "I am a lover of peace, Sir Knight, and do not consort with Robin's bold fellows." "Nay, I think no harm of Master Hood," said the knight, "but much I yearn to have speed with him in mine own person." "If that be all, mayhap I can guide you to his haunts," said Tuck, who foresaw in this knight a possible gold bag for Robin. "In sooth, I could not well live in these woods without hearing somewhat of the outlaws, but matters of religion are my chief joy and occupation." "I will go with you, brother," said the Black Knight. So without more ado they went their way into the forest, the knight riding upon his charger, and Tuck pacing along demurely by his side. The day had dawned clear and bright, and now with the sun a good 3 hours high a sweet autumn fragrance was in the air. The wind had just the touch of coolness in it which sets the hunter's blood to tingling, and every creature of nature seemed bounding with joyous life. The knight sniffed the fresh air in delight. "By my halidome," quoth he, "but the good greenwood is the best place to live in after all. What court or capital can equal this for full-blooded men?" "None of this earth," replied Tuck smilingly, and once more his heart warmed toward the courteous stranger. They had not proceeded more than 3 or 4 miles along the way from Fountain Abbey to Barnesdale when of a sudden the bushes just ahead of them parted, and a well-knit man with curling brown hair stepped into the road and laid his hand upon the knight's bridle. It was Robin Hood. He had seen Friar Tuck a little way back, and shrewdly suspected his plan. Tuck, however, feigned not to know him at all. "Hold!" cried Robin. "I am in charge of the highway this day, and must exact an accounting from all passers-by." "Who is it bids me hold?" asked the knight quietly. "I am not in the habit of yielding to one man." "Then here are others to keep me company," said Robin, clapping his hands, and instantly a half-score other stalwart fellows came out of the bushes and stood beside him. "We be yeomen of the forest, Sir Knight," continued Robin, "and live under the greenwood tree. We have no means of support, thanks to the tyranny of our overlords, other than the aid which fat churchmen and goodly knights like yourselves can give. And as ye have churches and rents both, and gold in great plenty, we beseech ye for Saint Charity to give us some of your spending." "I am but a poor monk, good sir," said Friar Tuck in a whining voice, "and am on my way to the shrine of Saint Dunstan, if your worshipfulness will permit." "Tarry a space with us," answered Robin, biting back a smile, "and we will speed you on your way." The Black Knight now spoke again. "But we are messengers of the King," quoth he. "His Majesty himself tarries here and would have speech with Robin Hood." "God save the King," said Robin, doffing his cap loyally, "and all that wish him well. I am Robin Hood, but I say cursed be the man who denies our liege King's sovereignty." "Have a care," said the knight, "or you shall curse yourself." "Nay, not so," replied Robin curtly. "The King has no more devoted subject than I, nor have I despoiled aught of his save mayhap a few deer for my hunger. My chief war is against the clergy and barons of the land who bear down upon the poor. But I am glad," he continued, "that I have met you here, and before we end you shall be my friend and taste of our greenwood cheer." "But what is the reckoning?" asked the knight, "for I am told that some of your feasts are costly." "Nay," responded Robin, waving his hands, "you are from the King. Natheless, how much money is in your purse?" "I have no more than 40 gold pieces, seeing that I have lain a fortnight at Nottingham with the King, and have spent some goodly amounts upon other lordings," replied the knight. Robin took the 40 pounds and gravely counted it. One half he gave to his men, and bade them drink the King's health with it. The other half he handed back to the knight. "Sir," he said courteously, "have this for your spending. If you lie with kings and lordings overmuch, you are like to need it." "Gramercy," replied the other, smiling. "And now lead us on to your greenwood hostelry." So Robin went on the one side of the knight's steed and Friar Tuck on the other, and the men went before and behind till they came to the open glade before the caves of Barnesdale. Then Robin drew forth his bugle and winded the 3 signal blasts of the band. Soon there came a company of yeomen with its leader, and another, and a third, and a fourth, till there were 70 yeomen in sight. All were dressed in new livery of Lincoln green, and carried new bows in their hands and bright short swords at their belts. And every man bent his knee to Robin Hood ere taking his place before the board, which was already set. A handsome dark-haired page stood at Robin's right hand to pour his wine and that of the knightly guest, while the knight marvelled much at all he saw, and said within himself, "These men of Robin Hood's give him more obedience than my fellows give to me." At the signal from Robin the dinner began. There was venison and fowl and fish and wheaten cake and ale and red wine in great plenty, and 'twas a goodly sight to see the smiles upon the hungry yeomen's faces. First they listened to an unctuous grace from Friar Tuck, and then Robin lifted high a tankard of ale. "Come, let us now begin," quoth he, "and every man shall have his can. In honor of our guest who comes with royal word, here's a health unto the King." The guest responded heartily to this toast, and round about the board it went, the men cheering noisily for King Richard. After the feast was over, Robin turned to his guest and said, "Now you shall see what life we lead, so that you may report faithfully, for good or bad, unto the King." So at a signal from him the men rose up and smartly bent their bows for practice, while the knight was greatly astonished at the smallness of their targets. A wand was set up far down the glade, and thereon was balanced a garland of roses. Whosoever failed to speed his shaft through the garland without knocking it off the wand was to submit to a buffet from the hand of Friar Tuck. "Ho, ho!" cried the knight, as his late traveling companion rose up and bared his brawny arm ready for service. "So you, my friend, are Friar Tuck." "I have not gainsaid it," replied Tuck, growling at having betrayed himself. "But chastisement is a rule of the church, and I am seeking the good of these stray sheep." The knight said no more, though his eyes twinkled, and the shooting began. David of Doncaster shot first and landed safely through the rose garland. Then came Allen a Dale and Little John, and Stuteley and Scarlett, and many of the rest, while the knight held his breath from very amazement. Each fellow shot truly through the garland, until Middle the Tinker, not to be outdone, stepped up for a trial. But alas, while he made a fair shot for a townsman, the arrow never came within a handbreadth of the outer rim of the garland. "Come hither, fellow," said Little John coaxingly. "The priest would bless thee with his open hand." Then, because Middle made a wry face as though he had already received the buffet, and loitered in his steps, Arthur a Bland and Will Stuteley seized him by the arms and stood him before the friar. Tuck's big arm flashed through the air. Woof! And stopped suddenly against the Tinker's ear, while Middle himself went rolling over and over in the grass. He was stopped by a small bush, and up he sat, thrusting his head through it, rubbing his ear, and blinking up at the sky as though the stars had fallen and struck him. The yeomen roared with merriment, and as for the knight, he laughed till the tears came out of his blue eyes and rolled down his face. After Middle's mishap, others of the band seemed to lose their balance, and fared in the same fashion. The garland would topple over in a most impish way at every breath, although the arrows went through it. So Middle 'gan to feel better when he saw this one and that one tumbling on the sward. At last came Robin's turn. He shot carefully, but as ill luck would have it, the shaft was ill feathered and swerved sideways so that it missed the garland by full 3 fingers. Then a great roar went up from the whole company, for 'twas rare that they saw their leader miss his mark. Robin flung his bow upon the ground from very vexation. "A murrain take it," quoth he. "The arrow was sadly winged. I felt the poor feather upon it as it left my fingers." Then suddenly seizing his bow again, he sped 3 shafts as fast as he could send them, and every one went clean through the garland. "By Saint George!" muttered the knight, "never before saw I such shooting in all Christendom." The band cheered heartily at these last shots, but Will Scarlet came up bravely to Robin. "Pretty shooting, master," quoth he, "but 'twill not save you from paying for the bad arrow. So walk up and take your medicine." "Nay, that may not be," protested Robin. "The good friar belongs to my company and has no authority to lift hands against me. But you, Sir Knight, stand as it were for the King. I pray you, serve out my blow." "Not so," said Friar Tuck. "My son, you forget I stand for the Church, which is greater even than the King." "Not in merry England," said the knight in a deep voice. Then rising to his feet, he added, "I stand ready to serve you, Master Hood." "Now out upon ye for an upstart knight," cried Friar Tuck. "I told you last night, sirrah, that we should yet see who was the better man. So we will e'en prove it now, and thus settle who is to pay Robin Hood." "Good," said Robin, "for I want not to start a dispute between Church and State." "Good," also said the knight. "'Tis an easy way to end prattling. Come, friar, strike an ye dare. I will give you first blow." "You have the advantage of an iron pot on your head and gloves on your hands," said the friar. "But have at ye. Down you shall go, if you were Goliath of Gath." Once more the priest's brawny arm flashed through the air and struck with a woof, but to the amazement of all, the knight did not budge from his tracks, though the upper half of his body swerved slightly to ease the force of the blow. A loud shout burst from the yeomen at this, for the friar's fist was proverbial, and few of those present had not felt the force of it in times past. "Now 'tis my turn," said his antagonist coolly, casting aside his gauntlet, and with one blow of his fist the knight sent the friar spinning to the ground. If there had been an uproar and shouting before, it was as naught to the noise which now broke forth. Every fellow held his sides or rolled upon the ground from laughter, every fellow save one, and that was Robin Hood. "Out of the frying pan and into the fire," thought he. "I wish I had let the fire box my ears after all." Robin's plight did indeed seem a sorry one, before the steel muscles of his stranger. But he was saved from a tumble heels over head by an unlooked for diversion. A horn winded in the glade, and a party of knights were seen approaching. "To your arms!" cried Robin, hurriedly seizing his sword and bow. "'Tis Sir Richard of the Laigh," cried another, as the troop came nearer. And so it was. Sir Richard spurred forward his horse and dashed up to the camp, while the outlaw stood at stiff attention. When he had come near the spot where the Black Knight stood, he dismounted and knelt before him. "I trust your majesty has not needed our arms before," he said humbly. "It is the King!" cried Will Scarlet, falling upon his knees. "The King!" echoed Robin Hood after a moment of dumb wonderment, and he and all his men bent reverently upon their knees as one man. So ends chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Robin Hood. How Robin Hood and Maid Marian were wed. "Stand up again," then said the King, "I'll thee thy pardon give. Stand up, my friend, who can contend when I give leave to live." Then Robin Hood began a health to Marian his only dear, and his yeomen all, both comely and tall, did quickly bring up the rear. "Your pardon, sire," exclaimed Robin Hood. "Pardon, from your royal bounty, for these my men who stand ready to serve you all your days." Richard of the Lionheart looked grimly about over the kneeling band. "Is it as your leader says?" he asked. "Aye, my lord King," burst from 70 throats at once. "We be not outlaws from choice alone," continued Robin, "but have been driven to outlawry through oppression. Grant us grace and royal protection, and we will forsake the greenwood and follow the King." Richard's eyes sparkled as he looked from one to another of this stalwart band, and he thought within himself that here, indeed, was a royal bodyguard worth the while. "Swear," he said in his full, rich voice, "swear that you, Robin Hood, and all your men from this day henceforth will serve the King." "We swear," came once more the answering shout from the yeomen. "Arise, then," said King Richard. "I give you all free pardon and will speedily put your service to the test. For I love such archers as you have shown yourselves to be, and it were a sad pity to decree such men to death. England could not produce the like again for many a day. But in sooth I cannot allow you to roam in the forest and shoot my deer, nor to take the law of the land into your own hands. Therefore I now appoint you to be royal archers and mine own especial bodyguard. There be one or two civil matters to settle with certain Norman noblemen, in which I crave your aid. Thereafter the half of your number, as may later be determined, shall come back to these woodlands as royal foresters. Mayhap you will show as much zeal in protecting my preserves as you have formerly shown in hunting them. Where, now, is that outlaw known as Little John? Stand forth." "Here, sire," quoth the giant, doffing his cap. "Good Master Little John," said the King, looking him over approvingly, "could your weak sinews stand the strain of an office in the shire? If so, you are this day Sheriff of Nottingham, and I trust you will make a better official than the man you relieve." "I shall do my best, sire," said Little John, great astonishment and gladness in his heart. "Master Scarlet, stand forth," said the King, and then addressing him, "I have heard somewhat of your tale," quoth he, "and that your father was the friend of my father. Now, therefore, accept the royal pardon and resume the care of your family estates, for your father must be growing old. And come you to London next court day, and we shall see if there be a knighthood vacant." Likewise the King called for Will Stuteley and made him chief of the royal archers. Then he summoned Friar Tuck to draw near. "I crave my king's pardon," said the priest, humbly enough, "for who am I to lift my hand against the Lord's anointed?" "Nay, the Lord sent the smiter to thee without delay," returned Richard, smiling, "and 'tis not for me to continue a quarrel between church and state. So what can I do for you in payment of last night's hospitality? Can I find some fat living where there are no wicked to chastise, and where the work is easy and comfortable?" "Not so, my lord," replied Tuck. "I wish only for peace in this life. Mine is a simple nature, and I care not for the fripperies and follies of court life. Give me a good meal and a cup of right brew, health and enough for the day, and I ask no more." Richard sighed. "You ask the greatest thing in the world, brother, contentment. It is not mine to give or to deny. But ask your God for it, and if belike he grant it, then ask it also in behalf of your king." He glanced around once more at the foresters. "Which one of you is Allan a Dale?" he asked, and Allan came forward. "So," said the King with sober face, "you are that errant minstrel who stole a bride at Plympton, despite her would-be groom and attending bishop. I heard something of this in former days. Now what excuse have you to make?" "Only that I loved her, sire, and she loved me," said Allan simply, "and the Norman lord would have married her perforce, because of her lands." "Which have since been forfeited by the Bishop of Hereford," replied Richard. "But my lord bishop must disgorge them, and from tomorrow you and Mistress Dale are to return to them and live in peace and loyalty. And if ever I need your harp at court, stand ready to attend me, and bring also the lady. Speaking of ladies," he continued, turning to Robin Hood, who had stood silent, wondering if a special punishment was being reserved for him. "Did you not have a sweetheart who was once at court? One Mistress Marian? What has become of her, that you should have forgotten her?" "Nay, your majesty," said the black-eyed page, coming forward blushingly, "Robin has not forgotten me." "So," said the King, bending to kiss her small hand in all gallantry. "Verily, as I have already thought within myself, this Master Hood is better served than the King in his palace. But are you not the only child of the late Earl of Huntingdon?" "I am, sire, though there be some who say that Robin Hood's father was formerly the rightful Earl of Huntingdon. Natheless, neither he is advantaged nor I, for the estates are confiscate." "Then they shall be restored forthwith," cried the King. "And lest you two should revive the ancient quarrel over them, I bestow them upon you jointly. Come forward, Robin Hood." Robin came and knelt before his king. Richard drew his sword and touched him upon the shoulder. "Rise, Robin Fitzooth, Earl of Huntingdon," he exclaimed, while a mighty cheer arose from the band and rent the air of the forest. "The first command I give you, my Lord Earl," continued the king when quiet was restored, "is to marry Mistress Marian without delay." "May I obey all your Majesty's commands as willingly," cried the new Earl of Huntingdon, drawing the old earl's daughter close to him. "The ceremony shall take place tomorrow, and this maid is willing." "She makes little protest," said the king, "so I shall even give away the bride myself." Then the king chatted with others of the foresters, and made himself as one of them for the evening, rejoicing that he could have this careless freedom of the woods. And Much, the miller's son, and Arthur a Bland, and Middle, and Stuteley, and Scarlet, and Little John, and others played at the quarterstaff, giving and getting many lusty blows. Then, as the shades of night drew on, the whole company, knights and foresters, supped and drank around a blazing fire, while Allan sang sweetly to the thrumming of the harp, and the others joined in the chorus. 'Twas a happy, carefree night, this last one together under the greenwood tree. Robin could not help feeling an undertone of sadness that it was to be the last, for the charm of the woodland was still upon him. But he knew 'twas better so, and that the new life with Marian and in the service of his king would bring its own joys. Then the night deepened, the fire sank, but was replenished, and the company lay down to rest. The king, at his own request, spent the night in the open. Thus they slept, king and subject alike, out under the stars, cared for lovingly by nature, kind mother of us all. In the morning the company was early astir and on their way to Nottingham. It was a goodly cavalcade. First rode King Richard of the Lionheart, with his tall figure set forth by the black armor and waving plume in his helm. Then came Sir Richard of the Lea, with 80 knights and men at arms, and after them came Robin Hood and Maid Marian riding upon milk-white steeds. Allan a Dale also escorted Mistress Dale on horseback, for she was to be matron of honor at the wedding. These were followed by 70 archers clad in their bravest Lincoln green, and with their new bows unstrung in token of peace. Outside the gates of Nottingham town they were halted. "Who comes here?" asked the warder's surly voice. "Open to the King of England," came back the clear answer, and the gates were opened and the bridge let down without delay. Almost before the company had crossed the moat, the news spread through the town like wildfire. "The King is here! The King is here, and hath taken Robin Hood!" From every corner flocked the people to see the company pass, and wildly did they cheer for the King, who rode smilingly, with bared head, down through the marketplace. At the far end of it he was met by the sheriff, who came up puffing in his haste to do the King honor. He fairly turned green with rage when he saw Sir Richard of the Lea and Robin Hood in the royal company, but made low obeisance to his master. "Sir Sheriff," quoth the King, "I have come to rid the shire of outlaws, according to my promise. There be none left, for all have now taken service with their king, and lest there should be further outbreak, I have determined to place in charge of this shire a man who fears no other man in it. Master Littlejohn is hereby created Sheriff of Nottingham, and you will turn over the keys to him forthwith." The sheriff bowed, but dared utter no word. Then the King turned to the Bishop of Hereford, who had also come up to pay his respects. "Hark ye, my Lord Bishop," quoth he, "the stench of your evil actions had reached our nostrils. We shall demand strict accounting for certain seizures of the lands and certain acts of oppression which ill become a churchman. But of this later. This afternoon you must officiate at the wedding of 2 of our company, in Nottingham church, so make you ready." The bishop also bowed and departed, glad to escape a severer censure for the time. The company then rode on to the mansion house, where the King held high levee through all the noon hours, and the whole town made a holiday. In the afternoon the way from the mansion house to Nottingham church was lined with cheering people as the wedding party passed by. The famous bowmen were gazed at as curiously as though they had been wild animals, but were cheered none the less. Robin, who had long been held in secret liking, was now doubly popular since he had the King's favor. Along the way, ahead of the King and the smiling bride and groom-to-be, ran little maids strewing flowers, while streamers floated in greeting from the windows. I ween the only hearts that were not glad this day were those of the old sheriff and of his proud daughter, who peered between the shutters of her window and was like to eat out her heart from envy and hatred. At last the party reached the church, where the King dismounted lightly from his horse and helped the bride to alight, while Will Scarlet, the best man, assisted Mistress Dale. Within the church they found the bishop robed in state, and by his side Friar Tuck, who had been especially deputed to assist. The service was said in Latin, while the organ pealed forth softly. The King gave away the bride, as he had said, and afterwards claimed first kiss for his pains. Then the happy party dispersed, and Robin and Marian passed out again through the portal, man and wife. Out through the cheering streets they fared, while the greenwood men ran ahead and flung gold pennies right and left in their joy, and bade the people drink the health of the young couple and the King. Then the whole party took horse at Will Scarlet's earnest wish and went down to Gamewell Lodge, where the old Squire George wept for joy at seeing his son and the King and the wedding party. That night they spent there and feasted, and the next day Sir Richard of the Lea claimed them. And thus, amid feasting and rejoicing and kingly favor, Robin Hood, the new Earl of Huntingdon, and his bride began their wedded life. So ends Chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Robin Hood. How Robin Hood met his death. Give me my bent bow in my hand, and a broad arrow I'll let flee, and where this arrow is taken up, there shall my grave digged be. Now by good rights this story should end with the wedding of Robin Hood and Maid Marian, for do not many pleasant tales end with a wedding and the saying, "and they lived happy ever after"? But this is a true account, in so far as we can find the quaint old ballads which tell of it, and so we must follow one more of these songs and learn how Robin, after living many years longer, at last came to seek his grave, and the story of it runs in this wise. Robin Hood and his men, now the royal archers, went with King Richard of the Lionheart through England, settling certain private disputes which had arisen among the Norman barons while the King was gone to the Holy Land. Then the King proceeded amid great pomp and rejoicing to the palace at London, and Robin, the new Earl of Huntingdon, brought his countess thither, where she became one of the finest ladies of the court. The royal archers were now divided into two bands, and one half of them were retained in London, while the other half returned to Sherwood and Barnesdale, there to guard the King's preserves. Several months passed by, and Robin began to chafe under the restraint of city life. He longed for the fresh pure air of the greenwood and the rollicking society of his yeomen. One day, upon seeing some lads at archery practice upon a green, he could not help but lament, saying, "Woe is me! I fear my hand is fast losing its old-time cunning at the bowstring." Finally he became so distraught that he asked leave to travel in foreign lands, and this was granted him. He took Maid Marian with him, and together they went through many strange countries. Finally, in an eastern land a great grief came upon Robin. Marian sickened of a plague and died. They had been married but 5 years, and Robin felt as though all the light had gone out of his life. He wandered about the world for a few months longer, trying to forget his grief, then came back to the court at London and sought some commission in active service. But unluckily Richard was gone again upon his adventures, and Prince John, who acted as regent, had never been fond of Robin. He received him with a sarcastic smile. "Go forth into the greenwood," he said coldly, "and kill some more of the King's deer. Belike, then, the King will make you prime minister at the very least upon his return." The taunt fired Robin's blood. He had been in a morose mood ever since his dear wife's death. He answered Prince John hotly, and the prince bade his guard seize him and cast him into the Tower. After lying there for a few weeks, he was released by the faithful Stuteley and the remnant of the royal archers, and all together they fled the city and made their way to the greenwood. There Robin blew the old familiar call, which all had known and loved so well. Up came running the remainder of the band, who had been royal foresters, and when they saw their old master they embraced his knees and kissed his hands, and fairly cried for joy that he had come again to them. And one and all forswore fealty to Prince John, and lived quietly with Robin in the greenwood, doing harm to none and only awaiting the time when King Richard should come again. But King Richard came not again, and would never need his royal guard more. Tidings presently reached them of how he had met his death in a foreign land, and how John reigned as king in his stead. The proof of these events followed soon after, when there came striding through the glade the big familiar form of Little John. "Art come to arrest us?" called out Robin, as he ran forward and embraced his old comrade. "Nay, I am not come as the Sheriff of Nottingham, thanks be," answered Little John. "The new King has deposed me, and 'tis greatly to my liking, for I have long desired to join you here again in the greenwood." Then were the rest of the band right glad at this news, and toasted Little John royally. The new King waged fierce war upon the outlaws, soon after this, and sent so many scouting parties into Sherwood and Barnesdale that Robin and his men left these woods for a time and went into Derbyshire, near Haydon Hall. A curious pile of stone is shown to this day as the ruins of Robin's castle, where the bold outlaw is believed to have defied his enemies for a year or more. At any rate, King John found so many troubles of his own after a time that he ceased troubling the outlaws. But in one of the last sorties Robin was wounded. The cut did not seem serious and healed over the top, but it left a lurking fever. Daily his strength ebbed away from him until he was in sore distress. One day as he rode along on horseback near Kirklees Abbey, he was seized with so violent a rush of blood to the head that he reeled and came near falling from his saddle. He dismounted weakly and knocked at the abbey gate. A woman shrouded in black peered forth. "Who are you that knock here? For we allow no man within these walls," she said. "Open, for the love of Heaven," he begged. "I am Robin Hood, ill of a fever and in sore straits." At the name of Robin Hood the woman started back, and then, as though bethinking herself, unbarred the door and admitted him. Assisting his fainting frame up a flight of stairs and into a front room, she loosed his collar and bathed his face until he was revived. Then she spoke hurriedly in a low voice. "Your fever will sink if you are bled. See, I have provided a lancet and will open your veins while you lie quiet." So she bled him, and he fell into a stupor which lasted nearly all that day, so that he awoke weak and exhausted from loss of blood. Now there is a dispute as to this abbess who bled him. Some say that she did it in all kindness of heart, while others aver that she was none other than the former sheriff's daughter, and found her revenge at last in this cruel deed. Be that as it may, Robin's eyes swam from very weakness when he awoke. He called warily for help, but there was no response. He looked longingly through the window at the green of the forest, but he was too weak to make the leap that would be needed to reach the ground. He then bethought him of his horn, which hung down at his knee. He set his horn unto his mouth, and blew out weak blasts 3. Little John was out in the forest near by, or the blast would never have been heard. At their sound he sprang to his feet. "Woe, woe!" he cried. "I fear my master is near dead, he blows so wearily." So he made haste and came running up to the door of the abbey and knocked loudly for admittance. Failing to get reply, he burst in the door with frenzied blows of his mighty fist, and soon came running up to the room where Robin lay, white and faint. "Alas, dear master," cried Little John in great distress, "I fear you have met with treachery. If that be so, grant me one last boon, I pray." "What is it?" asked Robin. "Let me burn Kirklees Hall with fire, and all its nunnery." "Nay, good comrade," answered Robin Hood gently, "I cannot grant such a boon. The dear Christ bade us forgive all our enemies. Moreover, you know I never hurt woman in all my life, nor man when in woman's company." He closed his eyes and fell back, so that his friend thought him dying. The great tears fell from the giant's eyes and wet his master's hand. Robin slowly rallied and seized his comrade's outstretched arm. "Lift me up, good Little John," he said brokenly. "I want to smell the air from the good greenwood once again. Give me my good yew bow. Here, here, and fix a broad arrow upon the string. Out yonder, among the oaks, where this arrow shall fall, let them dig my grave." And with one last mighty effort he sped his shaft out of the open window, straight and true, as in the days of old, till it struck the largest oak of them all and dropped in the shadow of the trees. Then he fell back upon the sobbing breast of his devoted friend. "'Tis the last," he murmured. "Tell the brave hearts to lay me there with the green sod under my head and feet, and let them lay my bent bow at my side, for it has made sweet music in mine ears." He rested a moment, and Little John scarce knew that he was alive. But on a sudden Robin's eye brightened, and he seemed to think himself back once more with the band in the open forest glade. He struggled to rise. "Ha! 'Tis a fine stag, Will. And Allan, thou never didst strum the harp so sweetly. How the light blazes! And Marion, 'tis my Marion, come at last!" So died the body of Robin Hood. But his spirit lives on through the centuries in the deathless ballads which are sung of him, and in the hearts of men who love freedom and chivalry. They buried him where his last arrow had fallen, and they set a stone to mark the spot, and on the stone were graven these words: "Here underneath his little stone lies Robert, Earl of Huntingdon. Never archer as he so good, and people called him Robin Hood. Such outlaws as he and his men will England never see again." So ends chapter 24. So ends Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden.